Hi there. Welcome, Matt.
I'm muted.
I muted everyone automatically just on entrance, but I think everyone should be able to unmute.
No worries.
How are you doing?
I am doing quite well. How are you?
I'm good. Just a bit bored with this lockdown, but otherwise all good.
Yeah, it is dragging on a bit.
Tedious, yeah.
G'day there.
Hi there. So what we'll do is we'll just wait for around 5 minutes until everyone's joined, and then we'll start.
Sounds good.
Hey, Eric. Good to see you.
Hey, how are you doing?
Good. I'm just going to wait for a few more minutes just to allow other people to join, and we'll kick off then at 5 past.
No worries. Cool.
Right, we'll just wait one more minute and then we might as well start. Cool. Have I unmuted myself? I have. Let's kick this off then. So welcome to the UX Design and Software as a Service meetup. Tonight we have two CEOs giving us tips and tricks from their journeys in SaaS. Just to note, this session is being recorded and can be watched again at the meetup site at a later date. Big thank you to everyone that has joined the meetup group and to all of you attending this evening as well. Let me start by introducing myself to all the newcomers. My name is Clodagh Lynch. I work as Head of User Experience at Whisper, which is a SaaS product company. And the reason I started this group is so that like-minded people from different industries can get together and discuss issues we're having with solutions and techniques or frameworks that we have been using to help improve our SaaS products. A quick word to our sponsors for the evening. Whisper has kindly said they will sponsor this meetup, so tonight we are using their Zoom account. In future, if we ever get back to normal after COVID, we've set up the offices to host these meetups, and we have a fantastic brewery called Fury and Sons that are going to sponsor us with their amazing beers. So hopefully we'll all be sharing beers in the Whisper offices in the near future. Whisper has also provided a $50 voucher for each of our guest speakers. So I'll be sending those out to you afterwards, guys. And that's not all. For all of the attendees tonight, for once, we have something for you as well. Whisper has recently launched its new workflow platform called Whisper Workflows, where you can send automated sequenced messages to customers. They're offering a free 14-day trial to everyone in this meetup tonight. It does ask you for your credit card details, but it won't charge you unless you decide to extend your trial. You'll get 100 free SMSs and emails to send once you sign up for the trial. I'll post the address now in the chat if anyone wants to check it out. It's worth logging into. It might make your daily job easier. So let's get down to business. I'll just mention the format for this evening. Each presenter presents for 15 to 30 minutes, and we'll do a 10-minute Q&A session after each of their talks. Because of the large number of attendees, I've muted everyone, so if you could stay muted for the duration of the presentations, that would be appreciated. Please ask questions and add thoughts as you think of them to the Slido app. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy in an address now to the chat as well. And if you could all click on the link, I'm copying it. If you open up the Slido app and have it open in a window on your desktop, you'll be able to add questions as you go along and see everyone else adding questions as well. What we'll do is we'll then ask these questions to our speakers in the Q&A sessions after their talks. Now that we've all the housekeeping out of the way, let's get started. So let me introduce our first speaker of the evening. First up, we have Eric Fitzgerald. Eric is the founder of a social network app for taking on challenges called Cheer Me. I actually met Eric back in 2014 when we were at an entrepreneur pitching evening called the Founders Institute. We were both pitching our ideas to eventually get funding and get them up and running. I believe the Cheer Me app was your idea that you pitched, Eric. So it's become a reality. Well done. He's also the head of design and strategy at Narrative, and he's worked with an array of clients, including Myers, Bunnings, ANZ, Telstra, and loads of other well-known companies. Eric is the co-founder of Brightbill, which he started back in 2010, which was acquired by Amdocs in 2016. His talk tonight is on strategy, brand, and UX and SaaS. So without further ado, I'll pass over to you, Eric. Let me stop sharing my screen.
Lovely. Thanks, Clodagh. Hello, everyone. An absolute honor to be asked to speak here. So I'm going to just go through a slide deck and just give you, I suppose, illustrate my thinking on how strategy, UX, and SaaS work together. Now, I hope it might be a bit rambling, but what I'll try to do is weave in tools that you guys can take away and use yourself. So very happy to share a list afterwards in the Slido app. So, okay, I'll just start sharing my screen, and here we go. Let's see, there we go. And I hope everyone is doing really well. Now, can you guys see that? Great. Okay, cool. Let's go full screen on this. So, hello. My name is Eric, and I'm the founder, CEO of Cheer Me. Clodagh just chatted about that. That's been an epic effort, but Cheerme is very close to being in the App Store in about the next 2 months, I reckon. We've had a huge amount of work done on it recently. So I've been around a while, 23 years. It's blown my mind to actually even think that at this point. But as a part of that, I've been around. So I've worked across, pretty much most verticals, and each of them have their own flavor. But I hope that what I go into tonight will actually, there's a commonality. So we talk about SaaS. I actually look at everything as SaaS. It's pretty much, you're working in software, you're doing a service, it's SaaS. And I co-founded a company called Brightbuild, which I'll actually tell you a little bit about coming up. That was my disclaimer, by the way. This could be complete and utter rubbish, and I don't know if it'll be of any use to you, but yeah, so let's the rant begin. Okay. So I don't know if you guys know, but 66% of CEOs don't know what senior designers do. Okay, that's really interesting stat, and that kind of tees up where I'm coming with the idea of strategy. So you'll notice here we've got CEO, COO, CTO, CFO, CMO, but where is the CDO? Okay, where is the actual route to the design, or a design into the actual boardroom? And this has been a frustration of mine for years. And what it is, I've noticed, is that the design isn't valued the way all of these other disciplines is, okay? And I think, yeah, so where is design in the boardroom? I'm preempting myself here. What we're missing is the language of business, okay? Now, at the moment, I see, this is something I was investigating a few years ago. There is actually a meetup group called Design in the Boardroom, highly recommend it. I was going to actually create it myself, but these guys are already doing it. But what you want to be able to do is, as a designer, be able to talk business and talk about the actual business impact of design, the ROI design, how can I actually show the value of design. Now, why I'm talking about this is I'm talking about strategy, brand, and UX. So if you have aspirations of growing in your role and growing as a designer and growing and inevitably be going somewhere with your career, like this is what I've kind of come to the conclusion of. You need to know about what strategy is, understand a brand. Maybe this is just something that I'm quite passionate about, and UX. And UX is one of those buzzwords that business understand but don't quite get. I mean, some of them are quite enlightened, but to be quite honest, it's a differentiator. It's a huge differentiator in your arsenal for actually going to market. So, and design thinking, you probably guys all know about design thinking. I'm going to go into quite a few methodologies here that I find quite useful. Take them or leave them. But that seems to be the moniker that all of this stuff is coming through. So I had a very good ex-colleague of mine who used to be pretty high up in IBM, and he said design thinking now is becoming, essentially it's becoming the new business consultation kind of methodologies. And as visual thinkers and analytical thinkers and creative thinkers, you're incredibly well positioned to exploit this as a trend that's coming, and it's going, like, this will be mainstream in a few years. It's like UX. 10 years ago, UX was kind of fringe, and then started coming in gradually. So it's all of these things are the evolution of what design is, which is a very good and good segue. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and the journey I've taken to get to where I'm at. So in 2000, I came to Australia. I'd been working in Ireland for a few years in a company called Labyrinth. We were we had pretty much all the blue chips in Ireland, but that was because we're .com, we're new, we're shiny, and we didn't know what the hell we were doing. We made things look pretty, and we put together websites, but like terminology like information architecture, responsive design, nothing like that even existed back then. But I came to Australia and I kind of fell on my feet. I worked with a number of companies, and I went in and I got a job with a company called who was it initially? It was NAB. I didn't even know who NAB were. It was fresh off the boat, literally. Ended up working with quite a lot like REA, BHP Billiton, NAB, and worked with Ogilvy and DT Digital. We landed Meyer when I was there. That's my design. We landed Bunnings. That was really good. That actually, I have to claim that was kept for 10 years, apparently, that design. I know that Aqua now, or previously DT Digital, have done an incredible job in updating that. So long story short, around 2007, I decided to go back to Ireland, and I got a job as creative director with TBWA in Dublin. It wasn't a very good time to begin a startup, so I jumped ship because I got wind of this startup, and what it was called Get It, Keep It. Now, this is the beginning of the whole strategic thinking for me. So I was really privileged to be at the ground floor of this. I didn't name it, by the way, because I thought the brand name wasn't great, but I came in after that. And what it was a consumer play for your billing management. So you'd register all your bills, and what we would do then is schedule everything and give you consumption insights. And it was great. Everyone loved it. And our business model was turn off paper for the service providers. But how we were actually doing that was we were using users' credentials to log in on their behalf, and then we were ingesting all the bills into Get It, Keep It. So all the billers said, great, thank you very much, but we're not paying you a penny, and we kind of got to the point where we actually had to do a pretty hard pivot. So we're like, oh my God, I think we had about 6 weeks money in the bank at that point, and we had to do a pretty hard pivot. And we came up with this company, and the name was Brightbill. So what we realized in doing all our user interviews, working with people, and actually doing the technical side of it, was that there was this layer, a billing layer out there that existed since the 80s, and there was no technology around it. So what we essentially built was a presentation platform that sat separate from the mainframe billing engine, and that allowed us to create more intuitive and empathetic bills that were personalized for each recipient. And any particular issue that raised eyebrows with the consumer, we could address, because more often than not, what we realized was bills, it's the one piece of correspondence everyone reads. And this is the one piece of correspondence every brand sends out to people. And it's a demand for money. Like, it's a terrible way to actually communicate. So we flipped that in its head. So we separated the art of explaining the bill. And this was really like, if you want to think about service design and UX. And then we actually pulled the science of calculating the bill out. And we reduced by the time we finished, or we ended up, we had, in the US, we had AT&T, Sprint, T-Mobile, Comcast. We worked the Royal Mail a bit, Vodafone Europe, Rogers in Canada, Tele2 in Holland. But one of our clients, we reduced their call center costs by 50 million. So the actual huge, what we've discovered was a huge amount of telco costs is actually support. So we managed to reduce that, and in 2016 we were acquired by Amdocs, which is the #1 billing company in the world. Yeah, so like our term was Bills Reinvented. Now, what has this got to do with strategy? Look, we were feeling around the dark around like the name Brightbill. We came up with that. We did the branding. We did the design. We were doing user experience design, but we didn't have anything to actually go, well, hang on, what is the business? Where is it going? And that kind of began me really starting to just read in earnest about methodologies, about being able to clarify what is a business, what are they about, what are they trying to solve, and even having that language, like that's it was even doing that took quite a while. And it's like every part of the design that I've worked over the years is that I've kind of followed my nose. There's always been something that I think that this might be a thing, And eventually when you look over your shoulder, you realize, oh my God, that was that thing. So one of the things that was really amazing for me is that, like I was saying, this problem, I was frustrated because I was getting terrible briefs. So people will go off and say, here, design a website. And more often than not, you do a beautiful design, you do your UX. But what happened was you found that a lot of companies and a lot of clients were figuring out their business model within your design. So you need some way of not doing that. And this is the time when you're doing Photoshop and layers, and you didn't have things like instances or anything like that. So it was like hardcore, like, you know, you're putting in mad hours and you're frustrated because you just want clarity on what am I trying to communicate here and how best can I do that through the design and user experience. So that's where I really started pushing in towards strategy. I had no business in asking about strategy. I had no business going in saying you should do it this way or that way. But I persisted and I started reading up on it. And a few years ago, and I know quite a lot of you will be very familiar with this and any kind of canvases, but this blew my mind. And I highly recommend it to anyone who hasn't done it. This thing is a Swiss Army knife. It's incredible. So you can literally map an entire business onto one page. And this serves to be, it's incredibly powerful because it gives you an understanding of what the business is, what they're trying to achieve, and all these other areas. I won't go into it because probably don't have time, but highly recommend looking at it. And there's strategizer.com is where you go. But what you can do as well is you can hack this. You can hack this into what you want. I hacked it into a government business model a few years ago. It was very successful. We sold that into federal government. Well, we didn't sell it and we used it. But what this gives you is a really visual way of figuring out what this business is about. Okay, so, and I'll get to why that influences UX as we go. This is it in action. I use this thing all the time. So currently I'm working in narrative. We are actually going through an incredible shift and change. We're actually about 4 companies at the moment. I've had to create an umbrella company that houses narrative. There's Excellion, there's another 2 coming along and I can't talk about, and then the umbrella company. And what we did through using this methodology is figured out all their business models, how they relate to each other, what's their value propositions, and how to talk about all these things. Now, this is all design thinking. This is all visual. And it's great, really good for participation and people just understanding what's the company about and actually be able to eliminate all the rubbish. And the number one thing it does is it creates a shared understanding. You literally are on the same page. And it also creates a way of you having, if you've got differences of opinion, it comes out pretty fast here. A further evolution of the business model canvas is it dives into 2 sections of it. And what they create is value proposition design. And this is where you can come up with like, what is the sell on the business we're doing. Again, this is all design thinking, but this then becomes very powerful because you can start actually understanding your customers. Now you'll notice there's some overlaps here, like customer jobs. So think about your personas. You know, what are my pains? What are my gains? You are now, or if you do personas, you're halfway here. And then the other side of it is that you're figuring out what are the things in the company or the offering that are going to solve these things for my user or my customer. Now, this is again actually doing this, and what this then is creates a hierarchy of communication for you actually selling in, saying this is the number one pain that we are solving. That goes to the top of the list. Now, great. Now that's a lot to take on board, but what you have done now is that you've figured out what are the levers, what is the business doing, what are we trying to sell? And that actually informs your brand. So it gives you a brand strategy, okay? Now, this is another highly recommended. It's Google Ventured created this thing called a brand sprint. You can do it in 5 days. There's a 3-hour version. I've gotten it down to an hour and a half. But you can get it down to an hour and a half if you do the business model canvas and value proposition design. And what this does again is that you are now absolutely in the strategic space. So if you're doing this, you're sitting in the room, you should be sitting in the room with the decision makers. So you should at least have the CEO or the people who signed the checks in here. And what you are now is you're a designer doing business, okay? And it's very intuitive. I find these really, and it's good fun and it's good discussion kind of tools. Again, highly recommend this book. You can get it as a Audible book. That's usually the way I usually eat these books. I can't read them, they put me to sleep in 5 minutes, but I can definitely listen to them. Here's an example. I worked for a company called Salsa Digital for a few years, and we went from being essentially do everything shop to, by the time we left, we were doing federal and state level government. We really focused in on that and went from, I suppose, like mom and pop retailers up to enterprise. So I came in at the beginning and they had a tomato, like a very old tomato, as their brand. And using a few of those tools I've shown you before, because they didn't exist back then, but versions of, we came up with a brand. So we wanted to explain what is like salsa, and we couldn't explain it because it was everything. So eventually we came up, and I remember I was talking about a tomato, and they had this old tomato, and we had to maintain the tomato. They loved the tomato. I hated the tomato, you know. So it was, so how do we do it? How do we explain what we're about? So we unpacked what is the business, went through the business model canvas, did all these things, and then we realized we were three things. We were strategy, design, and engineering. Okay, and we all came together. They're the disciplines. But then what that became was our brand logo. So now we have a story. That story, we can talk to this logo and this brand, and we can talk to it, and then we can actually talk to it in a very concrete sense in terms of the service offerings that we have for our clients. And then that even filters down into, if you see the Minter Ellison over here, that, like, if you look at that shape that we hide that under, that was the brand device that we used. Now, how did we get there? It was all through strategy conversations and creative conversations, creative thinking. And even like doing salsa, like you notice down here, it has news, and we used a zombie for that because that actually reflected the character of the principals in the company. Like, they didn't want the thing to be too serious, and a bit of fun. Okay, great. So I've talked about strategy, I've talked about brand. Now let's talk about how does that work with UX, okay? Now, remember at the top of this, I was talking about I was getting terrible briefs. I didn't know where or what I should be doing. So a lot of you are probably familiar with this. I came across this and made a lot of sense to me, but these are the components of UX design. So more often than not, you don't get the bit at the bottom, which is the foundation, strategy. Now you have figured out this, everything I've shown you prior to this is you've got the strategy, you understand the brand. So I know that this brand is a teen brand, it's playful, therefore my color palette can be crazy, you know, or the language I use within my call to actions can be, you know, quite fun. And as I build up these layers, so you got your scope is pretty much the housekeeping side of it, the structure, you've figured out, I mean, your strategy again figures out your IA and how that works, and then your skeletons is your wireframing. But again, that wireframing, your prototyping, that's all based on who's your customer, what's the experience, and then your surface level are the visuals, and then the personality comes through. That personality you figured out a while ago in your value prop and in your business model canvas. You'll be able to figure out who you are as a brand. I'll give you, how are we going for time, Clodagh? All good? Yeah, okay, good. All right, so I just want to show you another example of how this worked. This was probably one of the more rewarding and challenging jobs I had. So a few years ago, I worked with a company called Innowell. They were a mental health management platform, and it was a co-venture between PwC and the University of Sydney. Now, I want you to look at, there's a little red button up the corner there, and I need help now. This is where all the strategy comes in, but also where like user interviews are critical. So we had a cohort of the top mental health advocates in Australia, and we got them together every quarter, and we talked to them, and it was a big group, and it was pretty intense because we're talking about like pretty serious issues like mental health, but also issues like suicide, and when people suicide, and how can we help people and de-escalate that. So one of the things we did was we went through like, what is Innowell? What is it as a brand? So it needs to be the character of it. I'm just trying to remember now, and probably I might have to put a disclaimer if I get this wrong. But through everything we went through, we figured out like we're a friend, but we're not a, you know, a best buddy. We're a steady hand, and we'll give you advice, and we're a calming influence. So all that came through strategy. But one of the things was that as a designer and as a design snob, self-professed, there was a big red button up the corner. I couldn't stand it. I was like, guys, this is like, it's like, look at my lovely blues and my nice calm greens. It keeps people calm, blah, blah, blah. And we had a session with a few people, and one person said, we need, I just wanted to have a help button in red, or like red text. And I was like, okay, why does it have to be a big red button? It's ugly, like, you know? And he said, you have to understand that when somebody presses that button, they're probably at the lowest point in their life. They're probably crying, and they probably have no way out. And this is the last thing that they're going to press. And I kind of had a moment, and I went, Jesus, like, get over myself as a designer. They can have the red button, you know? And what we did from that was that button was a beautiful piece of UX, is that we triaged people through to, we figured out there was 3 routes they could take. And we triaged people either to treble 0, where it was immediate help. We also figured out that people often want to just talk to somebody else who was in a similar situation, so we could connect them to the appropriate type of person, or we could connect them, just give them information. So there's different levels of help. Now, why is that important in terms of strategy and UX? All the stuff I've talked about before kind of informed that decision making. Now, this is a process. Everyone's familiar with processes. We can all make processes. But this is kind of what we went through to get there as a part of the UX and the strategy. So the scenario definitions, we work with the University of Sydney, and they have like from massive amount of medical scenarios that we'd be figuring out, and we'd get their research from them, that research digest, and then we'd have our persona. So these are pretty, like, they're pretty weighty documents, I have to say, because these are like years of research behind these. And then we'd figure out our use case, and we'd do our user flows, and then we'd do our UX. And then we'd do prototypes, and then the lived experience cohort would actually take it in and test it. And then we would do a cycle of a few UX refinements. And then it would, once they were happy with it and it made sense with everything else, it would go out and we'd deploy it. Now, we're talking about SaaS. This is software as a service. This is literally what we're providing, is somebody using a tool for their mental health management. Now, it was a two-sided kind of play. We'd have the individual on the user, or the individual as we call it. We wouldn't use it, like, language is very important, especially in mental health. So user has negative connotations, as you can understand. So we call them the individual. And then on the other side, we have clinicians. So the user experience for the individual was more empathetic. It was very, was trying to be as informative without being overwhelming and too medical. And then on the other side, the clinician side of it was actually quite utilitarian in terms of like getting them to get the job and get them what they need immediately. Now, again, I'm showing you typography. Why is this got anything to do with strategy? So one of the things I just talked about there was somebody in a bad way using the app, pressing a button. We have to absolutely ensure that we have AA compliance across all our typography and colors and our responsiveness. So it has to work. So we really went to town and got our design system, which I'll get to, set up really, really well. So everything was based on, actually, if you go to gridlover.net, bookmark it, incredible. If you want to set up really good grids really nicely, all based on your body font sizes. And then, of course, with our palettes, now these are all our AA compliance contrasts. But why is this important? It's pretty standard these days, but we really absolutely had to ensure this because we had a lot of, I suppose we had clinicians using it, and we had a lot of government people looking at this as well. So all of this is a part of what the strategy you're talking about, the UX you're talking about, kind of feeds into your design system. And you'll notice on this graphic here, you've got your identity, principles, and best practices. So that identity and principles, that's your strategy side of it. The best practices is what on the tools, what everyone does here at this point, using your Sketch or Adobe, whichever. And then that feeds into your design and dev component patterns. Now, those patterns, especially in Innowell, are absolutely based on the mental health needs of our users. So we have to be incredibly cognizant about language, how do we present things, when we present it, just the colors, all those kind of things. Now, all of that is dictated by strategy. And then that goes into your design system. So here you have, like, we broke this down. We did a beautiful design system, actually, worked out with a guy called Glenn Santana, who's an absolutely awesome designer. And we built out this together. And I had another guy as well, a design ops person. So I don't know if you guys are aware of design ops. It is the new design role. And I know there's a brilliant design ops meetup run in Melbourne. Highly recommend it. And it's a great role. I won't go too much into design ops, but check it out. Oh yeah, sorry, I just put in abstract. If you guys don't do abstract, it's GitHub for design. Highly recommend it. Really, really good. And UX pin. Sorry, I put in these. I think there was a logic to all of this somewhere when I put this together. But yeah, UX pin, amazing resource for design systems, and all of these as well. Highly recommend these as UX. And I just talked about design thinking. So if you want to understand where strategy works, as actually, these are just a list of things you can sell as a UX designer, and suddenly you become a lot more valuable as an employee or even a business owner, and for your clients. Finally, how are we going, Clodagh? Good. Have we got 2 minutes? Yeah, great.
Yeah,
okay. Yeah. Just want to talk a little bit about CheerMe. I'm at the moment, I do have a day job, but my passion in life has been this for the last number of years. So CheerMe is motivation and support in your back pocket. It is a place for you to take challenges that interest you, and you recruit a cheer squad of friends and family, and they cheer you on to the end. So we just finished an accelerator program with the Launch Victoria Civic Labs. Now, we successfully answered this challenge they put out. So 2 different types of challenges, but how can we encourage teens to be more active? So in our research, we found out, like, and this is pre-COVID, so this has obviously gone up, 3 out of 4 teens in Victoria do not get the required 60 minutes of daily physical activity recommended by the Department of Health. So why is that important? Is that's a health crisis in the post. 20 years, 30 years time, you got an obesity issue that the whole country is going to deal with. So, and what we did from our research and everything was we found out essentially, look, kids' devices aren't just it. Their lives are scheduled within a minute. They've got so many things they need to do, schooling, whatnot. So we're trying to create something that is and this is for the government, a new, affordable, accessible, tangible solution that keeps teens moving. Now, CheerMe at the moment is focused on activity for teens, but we will move further afield. It's going to be interest-based. What I want to show you, again, just make it sense within what we've just been talking about. I showed you the value proposition design. So as a part of this, we have to figure out who are the people, the government policymakers, and we map them with the value proposition design, and we map them with our offerings as well. So we did this also for teams, community sports advisors, and providers as well. And what that actually gave us was a very clear view on what are the problems, and then that actually dictated our design, our UX. Okay, so we figured out how to actually. So we had, within the app, you can create your own challenges. And we figured out how can we actually do that correctly, that actually ticks all the boxes for these type of people. And that was all dictated, again, from using business model canvas, VPD, brand sprints, etc. So this is Cheer Me. I can't show you much more, but it's going to be in the app stores within 2 months, I reckon. I hope everybody uses it. It's bloody awesome, and I am biased. But yeah, and this is how it works. You pick a challenge, recruit a cheer squad, you get support from your cheer squad, and you smash your challenge. Yeah, so I hope you guys will cheer me when it does come out. And that's me. Thank you so much.
Eric, that was fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to seeing your app in the App Store. I'll definitely download it.
Thank you.
Definitely keep us posted. And there's loads of questions that have flowed in during your talk. Where does your user research fit into your layers? Is it part of strategy? And that's from Tung.
Usually, look, I mean, I'm giving you a sanitized version of UX. This is all very theoretical, but to be quite honest, getting to actually talk to users it's really tricky. I would say that it's in your UX. If you're doing startup, the first port to call is talking to users. You talk to users all the time. I would say it's not a part of strategy; it's a part of everything. Because one, you have to find out, do they have a problem? Two, you have to find out, does my solution fit their problem? And three, as you evolve, you need to continually go back to them. So I would be saying it is a continuous thing. And I know, look, personally as a designer, I find it very tough to actually go out and talk to people. But if I could recommend one thing, it's just learn to be able to go out and talk to people on the street. It's bloody hard, but I do it. And doorstep people or whatever, but it will reap dividends because it clears the fog. It clears the fog for you every time.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Tom, that question. Let's see. Next one here. What was the name of the meetup that you mentioned at the start that had already been created? You said you had to create one and then...
Yeah, it was I think it's called Design in the Boardroom.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I don't know if they're still meeting. They were meeting before. There's a group called Design in the Boardroom, and the name escapes me, but it's I'll try to find out who it is. I'll share it with you, Clodagh, later on if you need it. And the other one is Design Ops. That's a really good meetup as well. So.
I think it was Tom again actually shared that link to the Design Ops meetup in the chat. Yeah. So thanks for that as well.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. How do you garner the respect from doing design to strategy from stakeholders who have an expectation that you are just doing wireframes and prototypes?
Oh, this is brilliant. Yeah, I love it. You don't. You have to prove yourself. One of the things I've found for years is you don't look for permission. You can't ask for it. You just have to fight your way in. To be quite honest, I can remember doing strategy sessions on whiteboards. I swear to God, I didn't know what I was doing, but they didn't do it either. But you just need to, and look, I didn't have those tools. When I found the business model canvas, one of the things I did is that if you know one thing more than the other person in the room, you're the expert. So learn these strategies. If you go in and if you can use a business model canvas and you direct the way, then the term to respect, I suppose you're looking for, will happen because you're seen as the guide. And the beauty of doing something like business model canvas and all those other things is that all you're doing is asking questions and asking for clarifications. You don't have the answer. You're looking for the answer, and it's with the the stakeholders. So read, educate. Look, I just pulled these off at any one time, I've got like 4 or 5 different books going. That's a really good one, by the way. Design Thinking Playbook. Just read as much as you can. Look, you can't absorb everything, but what you'll do is you'll pick up stuff. And I'm just showing you what works for me. I'm not saying that it'll work for you, but read, educate yourself, never stop learning. And what will happen is that these opportunities will come to you, and you put your hand up. It'll be nerve-wracking. But before you know it, you'll have 5 or 6 under your belt, and you'll be away, and you'll be the man, you'll be the go-to. So.
That's fantastic. All these resources that you're bringing to us. Can I get the name of those books afterwards as well, and the authors? And you mentioned a whole pile of softwares: UX Pin, Strategizer, Abstract. Yeah, I've used some of these, but not other ones, and those canvases as well.
Oh
Fantastic.
yeah. And look, it's like, don't get too, I'm hitting you guys with a lot of stuff. Don't get overwhelmed by all these because, look, I use Sketch. I don't use Adobe. You don't need to know Sketch. If Adobe works for you, what works for you and what makes sense for you.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, next question. We use Sprint, the book as well. That's the 5-day sprint, isn't it? How did you manage to get it down to half a day or an hour and a half?
I think I can't claim this one. If you Google 3-hour brand sprint, there is a Medium post where someone essentially boils down the whole process into a 3-hour brand sprint. And again, this is very much about you standing up and saying, I can do this, and getting your sticky notes and being able to direct the whole thing. Yeah, I didn't get it down to 3 hours, but I've gotten it down quicker. But what I found is I've actually layered my processes and tailored them to what we need. So you start with a business model canvas. You usually do value proposition design. You can do then you can, like, you know, once you figure those out, and they're pretty tricky, there's a plethora of other processes that you can do. Like this one, again, the design thinking playbook, that's got like 40 or 50 in there. You can just familiarize yourself with those kind of things, and you'll find that the question you're trying to answer will probably be in one of those books, how to do it. And all you, like I was saying, you just need to just study it, figure it out, and then run the workshop.
Great, cool, good tips. I have a question here about the grids. You showed a website that showed grids. What was the URL for that?
Oh yeah, sorry, it's gridlover.net. It's awesome. You can get like maths can absolutely trip you up, especially with responsive design. I find this one very good. But the number one thing I'd say with your grids is understand typography and understand the importance of your body font, because that dictates everything else. It dictates your vertical rhythm, your columns, the whole lot, and your headings. And understand that before you get stuck into a grid lover, because that and that again, strategy will tell you what that should be. So does it need to be a bigger font or smaller font, etc.
Right, good tip. We've only time for one more question. So I've one here. How did you usability test for the mental health app or site that you built? Did you interview people with mental health problems? And if so, how did you find these people?
Like I was saying, I was a part of an organization, and the University of Sydney and PwC. So we were funded like by the government, in excess of 30 million. So we had deep pockets. No, I didn't. I wish I had equity. I didn't. So I was just a paid employee. We had a cohort of mental health advocates from all over Australia. So in the first year, I think we had a cohort of, I'd say be 20 and 30 of these people. And that then was, as we went through, we narrowed that down. But everything we would do would go through, one would go, like there was all these ethical gates that we had to go through, technical gates, usability gates, and then testing gates. So everything we did was put in front of these cohorts, and that was down to language. How does it work? And we had a team that organized that. So we're a very big organization. It wasn't just me. I'd love to say I did it, but I didn't.
That sounds like a fascinating project. Huge by the sounds of it too.
Yeah, it was challenging to say the least, but I came away with an incredible respect for the mental health profession.
Well, Eric, thank you so much for that talk. I've learned so much, and I've got a pile of links now that I need to check out as well after this.
Yeah, and I think I wrote them in my research. I wrote them down, so I can send them to you, Clodagh, if you want to. You can share it with the group.
That'd be fantastic. Thank you again.
No worries. Thank you, guys.
Cool. Right, our second speaker of the evening is Matt. Matt is the CEO and co-founder of Usability Hub. Usability Hub is a remote user research platform that takes the guesswork out of design decisions by validating them with real users. Usability Hub provides a range of services, including first-click tests, design surveys, preference tests, 5-second tests, and I think every time we have this meetup, somebody brings up Usability Hub, so most people here are very familiar with it. Matt, that's enough of me talking. I'll hand it over to you. Thanks again.
Thanks so much, Clodagh. I will share my screen and then kick this off. Okay. Cool. Typical bit of housekeeping. Can everyone see my screen now?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, fantastic. Cool. So, hey everyone, my name is Matt. I'm one of the co-founders of Usability Hub, as Clodagh mentioned. We're a remote UX research company based in Melbourne here in Australia. And I was asked to talk a little bit about Usability Hub in our journey so far. And I thought it might be good to talk about that in the context of a few things that we've learned along the way. But before I do that, I'll start with a little bit of background. So Usability Hub has actually been around for quite some time. We started off as 5secondtest.com all the way back in 2008. This is actually a screenshot of 5-Second Test, our website back in 2009. And I think this might actually be the entire site. Obviously, there was an app part to this as well, but definitely simpler times back then. And the way that this whole venture got started was thanks to this guy, Robert Hoekman Jr. So Robert is a veteran UX practitioner and an author and has been around for pretty much about as long as the entire UX discipline has. I attended a web design conference in 2008, and I saw Robert speaking about user experience design, which at the time, I think still wasn't really as a mainstream sort of discipline as it is now. And the main thrust of his talk was really about designing with users at the forefront of the process. And this wasn't something that I had a great deal of personal experience with. I've been working as a web designer and web developer for a few years at that point, and kind of embarrassed to say that I don't think I'd spoken with an end user at all at that point. So everything that Robert was saying really kind of resonated for me in a significant way. And after the conference, I purchased a copy of Robert's book, Designing the Obvious, which has, for a book that was originally published in 2002, has held up remarkably well. So it's still worth checking out. But this is where I was first exposed to this concept of a 5-second test. And for those who are not familiar, a 5-second test is a pretty simple usability test. It was developed by Christine Perfetti, Jared Spool, and the team at User Interface Engineering. And it involves showing a participant a design for a brief period of time, 5 seconds, and then you take it away and ask them some questions about what they saw and what they can remember. And this helps you understand a user's first impressions, and it's a really good way of figuring out if your design is actually communicating what you're intending. But the problem, which Robert was outlining in the book, is that because it's so short in duration and the fact that you need a reasonable sample size, say about 20 to 50 people, it was actually kind of difficult to organize this test in person, just logistically. And so in reading this, it seemed fairly obvious to me that this could be solved by creating an online version of the test, which along with a friend of mine at the time, we did. And then I got in touch with Robert and I sent him a link, and I think his email response was that he fell off his chair clapping, which was fantastic feedback to hear. And then even more amazingly, he asked if it would be okay to use 5-second test as a live usability test at a conference that he was speaking at in Chicago, which he did. And that actually gave us a lot of our early momentum. And so I wanted to share that just really briefly first up, because that's essentially how we got started. There was really no intention for this to become a business, no monetization, nothing like that. It's really just an opportunity to solve an interesting problem. And then over time, this has evolved into Usability Hub as it is today. And so this evening, I wanted to talk about 3 things that we've learned on that journey from where we started to where we are now. And hopefully some of those can be useful to you in your journeys in designing your products. And so the first thing that I want to talk about is viral loops. So I'm aware that talking about viral anything at the moment is probably a bit sensitive, but this is a legit lesson, so just bear with me. By viral loop, I really just mean a sharing mechanism that's baked into your product. So just anything that lets your users refer your product onto other people. And the basic anatomy is very simple. Users see your product, they start using it, interact with it, they develop a desire to share, they then share, and the cycle repeats. And the net result is that your user base is essentially growing itself without you having to do much. Now, the tricky part is this desire to share bit. People actually need a reason to recommend and share your product with others. And ideally, we as designers are incentivizing people to do this in a way that's beneficial not just to us, but also to them as well. Now, I can't claim that this was entirely intentional on our part at the outset, but when we launched 5-second test, the whole product was essentially one giant viral loop. And the way that it worked is that people would come to our site, they would upload a design, they would write out some questions, and then we would generate a link for them to share with participants. So this desire to share was actually part of using the product itself. You had to share to get value, which exposed more and more people to the product. And because a lot of these users were sharing tests with friends and family, friends and colleagues who were also designers, many of them started creating tests of their own. And this started to build on itself very quickly. Within a couple of months of launching, we had already had hundreds of daily users. And then after some time, we actually figured out how we could monetize this by leveraging this viral loop. So because you needed to share your test to get value, this meant that you actually needed a group of people to do that with. And not everyone had this. So in order to address this problem, we allowed people to actually purchase participants from us. And the reason this was possible was that because every time someone took a test using a share link, we offered them the ability to do another random test, so help out another designer. So we actually leveraged this viral loop in 2 ways. One was to get more test creators, but then also getting more test takers as well. So increasing that supply side of the equation. So the whole monetization strategy really hinged on this viral loop. And actually, once we had that in place, it really turned the 5secondtest.com website from a little pet project into the beginnings of an actual business. More important than that, this mechanism actually, not only did it make our initial monetization strategy possible, it's actually been the backbone of our growth this whole time. So to illustrate this, this is Usability Hub's annual revenue curve from 2011 all the way to the end of last year. There obviously aren't any labels on the y-axis here, but you get the idea. And why virality is notable here is that up until the start of this year, we have never had a sales function. We've never really even had a marketing function. We still don't have a marketing function. And on top of that, because we see a lot of project-based usage, we've historically had a very high churn rate. Despite all of this, we've still grown an average of 60% year on year, every single year since we started charging. So this whole thing is being driven by word of mouth alone. So an incredibly effective growth engine if applied correctly. One of the poster children for using referrals to grow is Dropbox, and they've done an incredibly effective job by rewarding users with more space for every referral that they make. And this is a really good approach, especially for a business application. And this is our first lesson that we took away. So What you want to do is you want to find opportunities for creating value when people share your product. This can be by rewarding people when they do it, like Dropbox does, or it can be by making it part of routine usage, the way a 5-second test is done. But whichever way you do it, when this is done well, it's extremely powerful in growing your user base and growing your business and your product overall. So that's lesson number 1. The second thing I want to talk about is emergent behavior. So I apologize, I don't have a lot of slides for this, so it'll just be me talking a lot. But by emergent behavior, what I mean is any behavior that is unintended or unpredictable. So regardless of whether it's beneficial or detrimental or benign, it's just that it's not what was expected, particularly in reference to what your intended design was, what your intended outcome was. And in our case, we had tons of emergent behavior. I'll talk about one example that was bad and one that was kind of benign, but then we kind of made it good, and we used the good behavior to solve the bad behavior. So I'll start with the bad. So as I mentioned, we had leveraged this viral loop to create our initial monetization strategy. So if you didn't have an audience to share your test with, you could purchase credits and then recruit participants from us. But we were also quite motivated to not leave anyone behind. We wanted to make our product and just usability testing in general very accessible. So if you're a person that didn't have an audience to share with and also didn't have any money or didn't have a budget, what about those people? So for those people, what we did was we came up with something we called a karma system. And the way this worked was that every time you participated in someone else's test, you would earn a karma point. And you could then spend that karma point getting someone else to take part in your test. So give a response, get a response. Conceptually, really simple. People really loved this. They loved the fact that we were community focused and that we had free access, and it created a lot of goodwill. But as the user base grew and people ran tests more frequently, the system actually had some unintended consequences. So the first problem was that because people were jumping on when they wanted to run tests of their own, typically they would need to get a bunch of karma points really quickly. And some folks would do this by just like rushing through as many tests as possible. They would like not read instructions, they would mash their keyboards, very, very terse responses. And as a result, response quality suffered. Fortunately, this wasn't the behavior of everyone. But then, unfortunately, because these karma users were all designers, this kind of gave rise to a different problem. Because these people were designers themselves, when they did give considered feedback, you could totally tell it was from a designer. So they would give feedback that was like super technical. They would talk about color contrast and give layout suggestions and things like this. And that can be useful. But people quickly realized that this wasn't really representative of a real world audience. It wasn't giving an accurate representation of what a regular user would see, what a regular user would experience. And over time, this actually emerged as our most frequent criticism that we received. So as you can all imagine, the quality of a UX research product really is only as good as the quality of the data that you get out. So this is a really big deal for us and the viability of the business as a whole. So while the intentions with the karma system were good, the outcome was less so. But fortunately, around the same time, we noticed a different kind of emergent behavior. We saw that a number of people were actually coming to the site regularly and only participating in tests, not actually making any tests of their own. Some were taking tests for design inspiration. Others were enjoying helping designers out. Some just found the whole thing fun, just for the sake of it. But because these people weren't motivated by earning credits, their response quality was actually really thoughtful. And we realized that we could at least solve the first part of the problem with the help of these folks. So what we did was we actually created a separate interface in the application just for these types of users. The goal here was to provide just a better experience overall for these folks and to help them take more tests And we felt that because they weren't really interested in spending the karma that they were earning, they should be rewarded somehow. So we started working on a way to allow them to turn their karma into money and be compensated for their time. I realize that saying turning karma into money is a weird sort of proposition, but that's how we did it. And this worked out surprisingly well. When we did that and we had this monetary incentive in place, all of a sudden, a lot of people who weren't designers started to take notice, and our panel grew significantly. So I think we launched that somewhere in 2014, 2015. And we have over 200,000 people that have signed up to take tests on Usability Hub now. So at some point, this growth really got to the point where panel activity quickly started overtaking activity from the karma system, which in and of itself was kind of an emergent outcome. And that organically solved the second problem for us, which is, I think for me, this highlights the second lesson that we took away, which is that a difference between intentions and outcomes is an opportunity. So what you intend and what you end up with often differs. And when this happens, you need to pay close attention and understand why. Sometimes this is surfacing a hidden benefit. So for instance, people just taking tests spontaneously was actually a benefit that we ended up capitalizing on. And then other times it's a vulnerability that you didn't know that you had, in the case of the way that people were using the karma system. But whatever the case, invariably there's an opportunity there to seize upon. So that's lesson 2. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is connecting the dots. So from the very outset, we've been extremely responsive to customer feedback. Obviously, we're a UX research usability testing company, so users are very much at the forefront of the way that we design and deliver our products. Over time, as I mentioned, like we'd only offered 5-second tests originally, but over time, customers asked us for various other capabilities, and it was only after we expanded to offer first click and navigation tests that we rebranded into Usability Hub. And this approach of listening to feedback, delivering things that people ask for, worked reasonably well. But one issue that arises here is that people often ask for solutions rather than describing their problems. And for a long time, we kind of worked under the assumption that people knew what they needed, which often isn't the case. And because we were delivering, one piece of feedback at a time, or like delivering on one piece of feedback at a time, we ended up with what felt like a very piecemeal product. All the different tests were standalone, so you could run a 5-second test or a preference test when we added that, but you couldn't do both, at least not both together. And when customers invariably wanted to do that, we added another piecemeal feature called sequential sets, so that you could actually chain multiple tests together. And this kind of worked fine for a while. It kind of addressed the feedback that we were getting. Now, around this time, a friend of mine, Brad Dunn, who actually works with Clodagh, introduced me to a tool called Product Board. And what Product Board allowed us to do was to map out all of the feedback that we were receiving and group it thematically. I mean, you can actually group it any way you like, but we were grouping it thematically. And in doing so, we noticed that a bunch of requests that we were getting, and by a bunch, I mean like most requests that we were getting, related to the way that sequential sets worked. So people wanted a bunch of different things. People wanted to see results from multiple tests on a single page. They wanted to skip welcome and thank you messages when tests were chained together. They wanted to identify a participant's response all the way through different tests. And as you can imagine, because we're chaining tests together and participants are kind of moving through them at different speeds, it means that participant 1 in test 1 isn't necessarily going to be participant 1 in test 2. They can kind of go out of sync very quickly. So there were a lot of consequences as a result of the way that we had just kind of tacked this feature on. And so we're getting all this feedback to address these various problems. And previously, prior to kind of mapping all this feedback out, there was a very good chance that we would have just delivered all of these features one by one in the order of most to least requested. But when we actually noticed the links between them, it made us curious, and we kind of paused. And we started asking, why were there so many users talking about this one particular aspect of our product? And we then decided we need to figure out what it is that people actually really needed. And what people actually needed was the ability to run tests of variable length and type. That was the actual problem that people had when you distilled it down. But no one had actually explicitly asked for this. They were asking for like very specific things about the way that sequential tests worked. And if anyone's familiar with the Henry Ford adage, this is a classic example of people asking for a faster horse instead of a car. So our users were basically looking at our existing product. They were looking at what was available and then suggesting these little tweaks. But they weren't really thinking about how the product could be completely different. They weren't reimagining the thing. They were just looking for like quick little solutions to their problems. And once we realized that this was what was happening, we started thinking about how the product could be completely different. And so we ended up actually rebuilding the entire thing, essentially from the ground up, around this concept of longer, more flexible tests. And we turned what were test types into sections. And instead of chaining multiple tests together, you just actually built out one big test, and you added as many different sections and questions as you needed of various types. And this was actually a huge change. It was by far the biggest thing that we had done. It impacted our pricing, it impacted the way that our panel worked, it impacted our marketing page. Like it was a complete rewrite. I think there was just like the sign up and registration and account settings pages stayed intact, but pretty much everything else had to be scrapped and kind of written from scratch. Now, obviously, a big undertaking like this can be risky because it's a big piece of work. When you're doing a big piece of work like that, you can't really do it in a very piecemeal way. You have to do it in a big chunk. And this ended up being a 6-month effort. But because there were just so many bits of feedback, and we had kind of connected them in this way that just really pointed us in the same consistent direction, we kind of felt like we had some confidence in this decision and confidence in this approach. And so how did this go for us? Well, this is recurring revenue from 2010 to 2017. As I mentioned, our approach up until this point was working really well. We would listen to what people would ask for, we would deliver on what they wanted, and we've been growing consistently for almost a decade. So the strategy really appeared to be working. And so in 2017 is when we started working on this. Feb of 2018 is when we launched the overhauled platform, and then this happened. So this is we actually saw the same amount of growth after launching the overhauled platform as we had in the last 3 best years combined. It's a very, very different graph to what we had previously seen. I mean, previously we had seen the outcome of incremental improvement over time, and this was essentially a step change in our business. It just wouldn't have been possible to get something like this if we had approached it in the way that we had been up until that point. And so this was a huge takeaway for us, actually, that it can be very easy to miss this in the face of constant customer feedback. People are asking for things, and it's very, very easy to feel like, they're asking for it, people want stuff, we need to deliver it to them. It can be hard to say no and kind of take a step back and look at what the broader thing is, and then deliver something that nobody's asking for. It's kind of it takes a bit of a leap of faith that hopefully you can mitigate by doing some research and connecting dots. But the lesson here, actually, I think Steve Jobs kind of put this very succinctly, is that it isn't the customer's job to know what they want. Sometimes this gets a little bit misunderstood. People take this to mean that you should disregard customer feedback and not listen to what people are asking for. But I kind of take this to mean listen to what people are asking for, and then really it's your job to understand what they truly want and need by kind of figuring out what it is in aggregate. And I think this is probably the most broadly applicable takeaway of the three that I've shared. So to wrap, this is a screenshot of our website today. The core value proposition hasn't really changed much over the years, but the product itself has evolved considerably. And a lot of those lessons that we've learned along the way took a really long time spent in the weeds for them to become clear. So yeah, I really hope some of those are useful to you, or at the very least, interesting to hear about them playing out in practice. And thanks so much for listening. You can find both Usability Hub and myself on Twitter. And yeah, happy to answer any questions. Thanks a lot.
Matt, thank you so much for that. That was fantastic. I love that you're saying that the customers come to you and they want you to solve a timely problem that they see instead of defining the overall problem, or they come with the solution pretty much of what they think you should do instead of finding out what the problem is. We find that daily as well when we're designing.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing because I mean, like, it's very easy to sort of trust the user and trust that they kind of know what they want. Particularly if, you know, a lot of people are asking for things, you end up with, you know, very vocal people that are, sometimes they end up threatening. It's like, hey, if you don't do this thing, we're going to leave. And it can be quite compelling, but something to resist, I think.
Yeah, we have those customers. You've hit the nail on the head. Right, we've a good few questions here for you. Let's have a look. From Tone, we've got, where did you think the shift happened to actually want to understand interactions or usability testing, e.g. the 300 million button?
Let's see if I can understand. So I'm just like, the 300 million button is like a reference to the Amazon button. Is that right? Yeah.
I think so. Is it, Tone? Do you want to unmute yourself, Tone?
Yep. Yeah, that's right. I think people actually understood the value of UX or usability testing when Jared Spool was able to sort of show that by observing interactions that they could actually, how would I say, increase, I suppose, business revenue.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I'm not sure where I would sort of pinpoint the inflection point that occurred. I'm sure that there is one, but I think it's probably the outcome of like seeking incremental gains. So you look for ways that you can actually outdo your competition and apply, you know, whatever resources you can. So one of the resources would be applying research and trying to understand what your customers, trying to understand your customers' behavior, and in instances where that, you know, works out incredibly well, people tend to kind of share that, and that ends up being sort of a compelling case study for others, and eventually that builds and kind of turns into a bit of a tipping point. But I'd be hard pressed to kind of pick a specific instance. It might be, you know, the $300 million button, but there might be other examples as well.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Here's another one from Tom. How do counter behavior or feedback that is affected by incentives, e.g. an NPS score of 8 to get a chance to win $100 for filling out a survey? So how do you counter behavior that is affected by incentives?
Yeah, that's right. So sometimes what happens is, say for instance, a user or customer is struggling with a process, but given, say, information that allows them to have an opportunity to gain, say a dollar value for just filling out a survey, how do you actually counter that economic incentive to actually get quality feedback?
Yeah, so I mean, that's a good question. You definitely want to be incentivizing people sometimes. I don't know if I would incentivize people to fill out an NPS survey. I think I would probably ensure that an NPS survey is delivered in a timely way. So at the point of like the conclusion of a particular experience, and I would want to sort of ensure that you know, people are in the state of mind where they're most likely to give feedback. But certainly, sometimes you do need to incentivize people to complete research. In those cases, I would try to ensure that the type of research you're doing isn't like qualitative in nature. So I wouldn't say like, I'm going to give you $100 and you can tell me how good I am, because that would obviously like potentially skew your data. But I would say like, I'll give you $100 to tell me like, what are your biggest problems at work, to try to understand your context a little bit better. Because there's no way to tie the monetary value to like what inputs they're giving.
Oh, good.
Great, thank you. We have two more questions. Why did you choose the name Usability Hub?
Yeah, I regret the name Usability Hub. I mean, usability, this is probably like a consequence of the sort of the way that the whole business came about. It wasn't really, we chose the name Usability Hub because at the time it was meant to be an umbrella for 3 usability tests. And that name made sense at that point in time. But since we've expanded our offering, now we have things like preference tests and surveys. It's actually like a huge number of our use cases are not usability testing at all. So the name is currently a bit of a misnomer. I would love for us to change this name, but you know, there's a lot of brand cachet, I guess, associated with it at this point. And you know, changing your brand, as I'm sure Eric can attest to, is a pretty significant undertaking. So maybe it'll happen.
I think it's fantastic. And last time we had a speaker from Ireland, and she was talking about it. She uses it, so it's globally renowned. And the last question we have, you mentioned chaining tests together. When you say chaining tests together, is it like testing a path within a product?
Yeah. So yes and no. We have a thing called a methodology called navigation tests, which allows you to test a critical path through your website or your application. So we do have a methodology like that. When I was referring to chaining tests together, this was a feature of the previous version of the platform. So we had a 5-second test, and that was a standalone thing. So it had its own sort of welcome and thank you pages and its result pages, and you know, so it was like you created that one test, and then you could create a click test or a preference test or any number of these different methodologies, but they were very much standalone. And if you wanted to create a longer test that kind of featured multiple types of these methodologies, you would chain them together using this feature called a sequential set. And that would just basically redirect a participant from, you know, after they complete one test, they would then be directed to take part in another test in that sequential set. But this is what ended up surfacing a lot of problems for people.
And probably what brought about the new Usability Hub, the new functionality.
It did, yeah, exactly. But it took us a little time to sort of cotton onto it.
Cool. Well, interesting journey and great presentation. Would you mind sharing those slides perhaps afterwards?
Sure. Yeah.
That would be amazing. Thank you so much. That was fantastic. And thanks for answering all those questions. And yeah, that's it pretty much, folks, for tonight. I just have some quick announcements about next time. Our next meetup will be in 6 to 8 weeks, and I'm talking to a number of impressive speakers such as Tony Biddle, who is the CEO of Loop 11, and Kirsten Mann, who is the Product and Technology Executive at Oracle. So that's it for me, folks. Thank you, and hope to see you again next time. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, everyone.
See ya. Bye, guys.